Hey there, it's the Unique History Channel. Today we're going to be doing a reading from How to Talk to a Liberal If You Must by Ann Coulter, and we'll be reading Chapter 8, The Battle Flag. So as always, let's jump in. During the Democratic primaries for the 2004 presidential elections, Howard Dean set off a tsunami of indignation where he said he wanted to be the candidate for the guys with Confederate flags in their pickup trucks, just like Bill Clinton was the candidate for the guy with the AstroTurf in the bed of his pickup truck. Like clockwork, every presidential year, the Confederate flag becomes a major campaign issue. This always throws Democrats because it finally gives them an issue to run on for support for the Union in the Civil War. After Dean's contrips, Al Sharpton denounced the Confederate flag as the American swastika, saying, "Imagine if I said that I wanted to be candidate people with helmets and swastikas." After briefly considering personal injury a lawsuit, Senator John Edwards lectured Dean, saying, "Let me tell you, the last thing in the South is somebody like you coming down here and telling us what we need to do." John Kerry said he wanted to be the candidate of the guys whose limo driver keeps the Confederate flag in the back window of his town car, and Dennis Kucinich said he wanted to be the candidate for the guys in the low-emission hybrid vehicles with Confederate flags in them. At first, Dean refused to apologize for allowing the Democrats' joyous self-righteousness. Dean defended himself, saying, "I think the Confederate flag is a racist symbol, apparently under the impression that it would help matters to explain it, that yes, in fact, he did want to be the candidate of racists." But eventually, Dean buckled and said it was the Republicans' fault. "I think there are a lot of poor people who fly that flag because the Republicans have been dividing us by race since 1968 with their Southern race strategy." Carol Moseley Braun backed him up, saying the Democrats need to get past the racist strategy that the Republicans had foisted upon the country. Okay, so just for the record, this was Carol Moseley Braun arguing someone not to play a race card. In fact, needless to say, it's the Democrats who have turned the Confederate flag into a federal issue because they lynched the North for being morally indignant, not about abortion, adultery, illegitimacy rate, the divorce rate, or President molesting an intern in line to the federal investigators. Indeed, not about anything of practical consequence. Democrats stake out a clear moral position only on the issue of slavery, because when it matters, they were on the wrong side of that issue too. In addition, expressing outrage over a nuisance, Democrats take sadistic pleasure in telling blacks that everyone hates them, demonstrating their famous appreciation of the nuance. Liberals believe the Confederate flag is pure evil, and anyone who flies the flag is pure evil. George Bush is a moron who sees the world in simplistic black and white terms of good and evil. I guess that's what liberals mean by nuance. Despite recent revisionist history written by liberal know-nothings, the nuance devotees, the Civil War did not pit pure-of-heart Yankees against a mob of vicious racist Southerners. If it had, the North might not have fought so hardly to keep the Southerners from as their fellow countrymen. President Lincoln, the great emancipator himself, wrote to the editor of the New York Times in August 1862, "If I could save the Union without freeing a single slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do it." Indeed, Lincoln did not even issue the Emancipation Proclamation well into the Civil War, and largely as a war tactic. Yes, the South has slaves. Martin Luther King was an adulterer. Life is messy. In his second inaugural address, Lincoln said the Civil War was God's retribution to both the North and the South for the institution of slavery. By allowing slavery to continue past God's appointed time, Lincoln said that all of us had sinned, and God gives both to North and South this terrible war as a whole woe due to those by the whom the offense came. Jerry Falwell, please pick up the white courtesy phone. Jerry Falwell. If only Falwell had said the 9/11 attacks was God's retribution for abortion, sodomy, and slavery, many of you liberals wouldn't have been so snippy. 600,000 white men died to end the offensive to God of slavery. Never so many died to prove that all men are equal means. God have mercy on us when our country is called to account for abortion. What is commonly known as the Confederate flag by Vermonters for example, is the Southern Cross, the battle flag the Confederate troops carried into the field. It was not the official flag of the Confederacy and never flew over any of the Confederate buildings. It was the flag of the Confederate Army. The great Confederate General Robert E. Lee opposed slavery and freed his slaves. Lee fought on the Confederate side because Virginia was his home, and he thought Virginia had the right to be wrong. Lee was an honorable man as well as a great general. His men followed him, many of them hungry, barefoot, and because his personal qualities, because they lived in the South, not because they held a brief for slavery. Shelby Foote describes perplexed Union soldiers asking a captured Confederate, poor shoeless, why he was fighting because he clearly didn't own any slaves. The soldier answered, because you're down here. Indeed, a small number of blacks served in the Confederate Army, presumably for reasons other than vigorous support of slavery. An abstract level, of course, the war was about slavery, but that's not why the soldiers fought. They didn't own slaves. Their honor is inviolable. And there were good soldiers. The Confederate battle flag is a symbol of military valor, a separation from the do as I say, not as I do North. It symbolizes what F. Scott Fitzgerald called romantic loss caused by charming people. Ask any male who ever played Civil War games as a boy if there was a marked preference for one side or another. Irritably, little boys bitterly fight for the ones who get to play in the Confederacy. So obviously it has nothing to do whatsoever with slavery. The preference for the South is purely based on military criteria of little boys. Soldiers in the Confederate Army were simply cooler because those in the Union Army. They had better uniforms, better songs, and better generals. And they had the rebel yell. Who would rather be J.E.B. Stewart in the dashing gray uniform, or the plumber's hat, or some shod hoppler from Maine? Civil War was hideous, but the only civil wars can be. But the victors allowed the vanquished to go home, knowing they had done their duty with unsurpassed courage and devotion. Because the South was treated with honor and respect, the war did not degenerate into unending guerrilla war, which has happened with other nations' civil wars. Confederate soldiers became a romantic army of legend, not of sullen murderers. When Confederate soldiers surrendered their arms, the Union general accepting the surrender, Joshua Chamberlain ordered his men to salute the defeated army. In response, Confederate General John Gordon reared his horse. As Chamberlain described, a horse and a rider made one motion. The horse's head swung down in a bowful grace direction. General Gordon dropped his sword and pointed to his toe in salutation. General Ulysses S. Grant drew up the generous papers for Lee to sign, proclaiming the trials for treason. After Lee had signed, General Grant ordered Union troops to overturn a portion of their food rations to hungry Confederate troops. A year later, Lee would allow his students to say no unkind words about Grant, calling him a great man who has honored the dignity of the South. When the news came to Washington that Robert E. Lee had surrendered, President Lincoln came out to the White House to announce the South's defeat. He asked the band to play Dixie. This was an unbelievable way to end a war, and ensured that it really did end. Winston Churchill described the Civil War as the last war fought between gentlemen. It is the proud military heritage of the South that Confederate flag represents, a heritage that belongs to all Southerners, both black and white. The whole country's military history, is a shot through with Southerners. Obviously, boys from all over fought in the country's wars and fought bravely, but it is a fact that Southerners are overrepresented in the country's heroic annuals. These are just sons of the South. Sergeant Elvin York, Audie Murphy, Hank Elrod, Lewis Clay, Dwight Eisenhower, Chester Nimitz, General Douglas MacArthur, General William Westmoreland, General Louis Gruel, Tommy Franks, and Bill Clinton. Phil Caputo, author of anti-Vietnam book Rumor of War, was one of the first Marines in Vietnam. He says all his best soldiers were Southerners. He could walk for hours and hit anything, he puts it there, just like their Confederate grandfathers. In the book World War II, Citizen Soldiers, Stephen Ambrose tells the amazing fears of Lieutenant Waverly Wearway from Batesville, Mississippi. A Baptist, each month he sent half his pay home to help build a new church. He never swore, he didn't drink, smoke, or chase girls. Some troops called him the deacon. But in admiring the critical way with his deep South religious convictions, Ray's worst curse was to exclaim John Brown, referring to abolitionists whose actions helped spark the Civil War. Ray single-handedly killed 8 German officers by sneaking up on them like deer stalker, Ambrose writes. You don't get more one Ray to division or even to an army. There was only one in the world like him, also a Southern boy. The love that motivated Confederate soldiers would be transmitted generations later into a vibrant patriotism in the South. James Webb, a former security of the Navy, describes Southern soldiers in his military novels were seen in for the South under their breath when they sang to their duty of their country, as if Southerners need to be reminded not to commit treason. They died at war not for old glory, but for prestige and lost hope of the South. When General George Pickett rallied his men before their history-making change at Gettysburg, he had to say, "Don't forget that you are from Old Virginia." The majority of military bases in the continental United States are named after Confederate officers: Fort Bragg, Fort Benning, Fort Hood, Fort Polk, Fort Rucker. Are you beginning to see the pattern? Or consider this. When was the last time you heard a GI being interviewed on TV who didn't have a Southern accent? These guys are in the military when there isn't even a war. It is a career military people, largely Southerners, who are left with the job of drafting fresh-faced kids from civilian life and whipping them into shape. Time to go to war. Southerners are truly America's warrior class. This is a shared cultural ethnic among all Southerners, not just the Sons of the Confederacy, and there are, incidentally, black members of Sons of the Confederacy. In February 2003, just a few months before the Democrats were working themselves into a lather over Dean's remarks about the Confederate flag, a Confederate funeral was held for Richard Curls, whose unmarked grave recently been unearthed. The memorial service was organized by the Sons of Confederate Veterans and the United Daughters of Confederacy. Though Quarles had died in 1925, the service was packed with about 150 people, including Quarles' descendants, community leaders, Civil War reenactors, and Confederate daughters. They sang Dixie. Quarles' great-granddaughter told the newspapers he was a proud man and would have been honored to see this. The honored man was a former slave who had fought for the Confederacy. The disproportionate number of blacks in the military is a reaction to the disproportionate number of Southerners in the military. 5 black Marines were posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor and Service in Vietnam. The mind-boggling acts of heroism drove down on exploding grenades to protect their comrades. This is what they trained to do. 3 of 5 were from the South. In 2001, about 30% of blacks in Mississippi voted to keep the 1894 state flag, which displays the Confederate flag in the upper left corner. As Larry Elder noted, with 30% of Jews voted to keep a swastika on a state flag. After touring the South, General Colin Powell concluded there was no impending menace of being a black elected to president, noting he had received the strongest supporters from white Southerners. Slavery is among the ugliest chapters in this nation's history, ugliest after abortion, which Democrats will get around to opposing in the year 3093. But it was not unique to this country, and it was not unique to the South. The American flag could be more plausibly stated to symbolize slavery than the Confederate flag. Slavery was legal under the Stars and Stripes for more than 70 years, far longer than any Confederate flag proved. The Ku Klux Klan did not begin using the Confederate flag until the 50s. Before that, they flew the Stars and Stripes. White supremacist nuts living in their mother's basements don't have a copyright to the Confederate battle flag any more than they own the copyright for Chevy pickup truck or the Christian cross, another symbol appropriated by the Klan. What does native African Kinti class get a free pass? It is a historical fact that American slaves were purchased from their slave masters in Africa, where slavery exists in some parts of the state. Indeed, to say slavery is the only African institution America has ever adopted. While some Americans express their pride in slave trading ancestors by calling themselves African Americans, donning African garb, pride in Confederate ancestors deemed a hate crime. Perhaps in a bid for the Catholic vote, Democrats demand those Masonic symbols be moved in the Great Seal of the United States. And how about the American eagle? The bird is a prey and hence offensive to rodents, a key Democrat constituency. It is vicious slander against the South to claim the Confederate battle flag represents admiration of slavery. It is pride in the South, has nothing to do with race, an honorable military history, the Confederate battle flag represents values that exist independently of the institution of slavery. Anyone who has ever met a Texan has an inkling what Southern pride is about. Ever heard of a bar fight starting because someone said something derogatory about the North? The battle flag symbolizes an ethic and honor belonging to all sons of the South. Liberals love to clutch their cheeks at such admiration for materialistic values. The only time liberals pretend to like the military is when they claim to love soldiers, so they don't want them to get hurt fighting a war. You'll do well to remember is disproportionately Southerners, some wearing Confederate battle flags under the uniforms, who formed the backbone of the military that threw back tyrants from Adolf Hitler to Saddam Hussein. Somebody had to engage in all those insane mind-boggling acts of heroism, and it wasn't going to be the graduates of Horace Mann High School. It was graduates of places like Citadel and Virginia Military Institute. Every year after the war was over, the Civil War veterans used to return to Gettysburg to reenact the famous battle. On the 50th anniversary, the Confederate veterans began reenacting Pickett's charge. The Northerners busted into tears and ran down the hill to embrace the rebels, overcome with emotion at how insanely brave Pickett's charge had been. Not so much Union soldiers respected Confederate soldiers. Man for man, the Confederate Army was the greatest army ever seen. It's outrageous for Northern liberals and race demagogues to try to turn the Confederate flag into a battle shank in the process spinning on America's gallant warrior class. Okay, thank you.